Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the weekending show team from Lionheart Radio. It's a chance to take a wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees, and an opportunity to hear stories from the past and present. In this episode, it's time to tiptoe through the tulips, and yes, we're mad about them, but not quite the way that people were in the 17th century. Tom's here to tell us all about tulipmania. We're down by the gorgeous River Coquet with Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust, and Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology is looking into the professor of the riverbank and seashore, the lang-leggedy heron. Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom Pattinson, all coming up on the Nature Garden podcast. And a very happy May to you, and by the way, I saw the first swallow of the season here on Holy Island this week, followed the next day by the return of the house martins. Now, most of our tulips are up and shining out proudly, some ever so regal in their resplendent colours, and what's not to love about this stunning spring bulb? Let's join Tom Pattinson as he travels back in time to the bulb craze that took over parts of Europe and caused joy and misery in the 1600s.
I love growing plants with a story behind them. Plants with history add another dimension to the garden. Sometimes you create the story yourself by planting something to commemorate a significant birthday, an anniversary, a birth in the family, or a national event. And when you see it year on year afterwards, you say, it brings back happy memories. It can even be a stem cutting or seedling or a division of a plant that a friend has given you. And each time you see it, you think of that friend, that gardening acquaintance. Other plants come to the garden with their own history. You do some research and you discover, wow, is that where it came from? Is that what happened? Now at the moment, I'm looking around the garden and the thing that's standing out a country mile to me is the tulips. They are gorgeous. What brilliant, vivid colours they have. I see them in the outer garden at the moment and other gardens around the country and parks. And of course, if you go across to the Dutch bulb fields, what a pleasant surprise there. Wow, it's magnificent. This tulip holds a secret. If you do your research, you'll discover that it was the Dutch Republic that suffered really financially in the 16th, 17th century, well, midway through the 17th century indeed, from the tulip demise. You see, tulipmania took off there. The tulip was introduced to Europe in the 16th century, 1550s, along with potatoes, tomatoes and other vegetables, but it really took off in the Dutch Republic. And they were well organised financially. They had futures where people could invest their monies. And tulips became a key future. People wanted the status of owning the best tulips available. And they bought and they bought and they bought. And we know with hindsight that the change in tulips, the change in the type of tulip available and the attraction of the tulip was caused by a virus which gave an extra colour and streaks to the petals of the tulip. And people went wild over these. They must have one to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And tulipmania took off. And predictably, the bubble burst. But when the bubble burst in 1637, financially, people were ruined. An example, there was a cultivar variety called the Viceroy. In 1637, it was exchanging hands for 3,000 to 4,000 guilders for a single bulb. To get that in perspective, a skilled craftsman at the time earned about 300 guilders a year. So that's 10 years' salary of a skilled craftsman to buy one bulb. According to records, there were several goods exchanged in response or in return for single bulbs of these plants. Things like a suit of clothes, a silver cup, 1,000 pounds of cheese, 4 or 5 fat cattle, and even land, acres of land for a single bulb, and houses put up as security against buying these bulbs. Amazing. So there's complete collapse. Lots of people suffered financially. What a story, but it's true. So when you see a tulip now, just think of what it came from. They're lovely, they're beautiful, but I'm thinking hard of equivalents in modern times. In my lifetime in gardening, I know that some plants cost quite a fortune to buy, or seems to be a fortune to me, but nothing could touch that collapse of people's money's economy.
Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust is on the banks of one of our bonniest rivers, and he's singing the praises of riverside flowers and looking at ways to help shore up our waterways with trees.
Well, it doesn't really get any better than this, to be honest. I mean, this time last week it was absolutely freezing, and here I am standing on the edge of the River Coquet, well, actually on a tributary of the River Coquet, the Thurston Burn, and it is beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, and the sky above me is full of martins, sand martins and house martins, and they're just swirling around and they're feeding on all of the insects that are rising off the fields and off the water, and it's absolutely brilliant. There's a bit of woodland here as well, and I've got to say there's loads of birds singing, making merry, getting ready to reproduce, and it's a beautiful day. The colours, well, they couldn't be more vibrant, the greens, to be honest with you. There's so many different shades of green coming out with all the trees coming into flower, into leaf I should say, not into flower. And there's all sorts of wildflowers in the verges, you know, sweet violets and garlic and wild garlic, all sorts of stuff. One of my favourites actually here is the lesser celandine, which tells me that this site used to be a bit of ancient woodland. And there's also loads and loads of dandelions. And dandelions are brilliant for wildlife. And the one I'm looking at the moment is absolutely covered in little black flies and the occasional bumblebee, which is seen already. And I've had a few butterflies on the wing, mostly peacock butterflies, so that's going to be fantastic. And the reason I'm here today is because it's another Rivers Trust project, Northumberland Rivers Trust project, and we're actually looking at the Thurston Burn, which is, it goes all the way up through to Weshet and beyond, all the way up the Long Horsley. So it's a good old long stream, and we're right at the confluence with the Coquet here, and although I've seen one or two fish on one side of this obstruction I'm standing on, I've yet to see any on the other, because this is a large concrete, almost like a bridge that goes across, and the only thing letting water through is a pipe. So we're going to be doing some works here to amend that. And the other things that we want to do in this area, because what happens is pipe actually effectively works a bit like a high pressure hose. It shoots water out, and the opposite bank to where I'm standing is starting to erode really, really rapidly because of that water. So that's all falling, and of course that just brings all the silt with it. So what we'd like to do is try and stabilise that by planting a few sort of willows, things like that. Something we call spiling, which is almost like weaving willow into a living wall. And that hopefully will stabilise these materials, because I can actually see at the bottom of the bank I'm looking at, I can see bits of the last ice age. All these pebbles that have been brought here and deposited by a glacier before that's retreated off are actually now showing visibly on the bottom of this feature, and that shouldn't really be the case. And the other thing that happens when you get this sort of thing is that for larger trees it often get uprooted and destroyed as a result of that. So that's going to be a good little project, this, I think, and I hope the weather's like this for them, because it's really, really nice. The other thing I've just noticed, actually, because I've been here before, but thankfully the last time I was here I reported that the bridge across the river had actually been blocked by fallen trees. So brilliant, the county council have been out and actually removed that. But this is a really, really nice place to come for a walk, and I don't think that many people probably know about it. And I'm going to recommend to everybody that if you don't know how to read a map, get learning quick, because there's all sorts of little treasures hiding on your doorstep, waiting for you to discover them. Now we've actually also got the main river here, just coming up over the rise, and I'm hoping that I don't disturb anything that I shouldn't, because at this particular point there used to be a mill. And there's a mill race, but the river Coquet here flies past at some pace. I've got to tell you, it's pretty big here. Big shingle bank on the far side, which is got a couple of mallards on it, and but there's not an awful lot of vegetation growing here, because actually the river's pretty fast, and a lot of erosion happening on this particular corner again. Now erosion is actually a natural thing, obviously. But it looks to me as if the pace of erosion here has actually got a lot higher, a lot faster. It's certainly quicker than we would expect, so who knows why that is. In this particular location there's no sign of stock or anything like that, so it may just be water levels, but certainly getting a few more trees into here is going to do some good. So well, anyway, I'm going to sign off now, go and enjoy myself. Hope everyone has a good day. See you later.
We're celebrating the tulip this week, and Tom's been looking into the world of bulb collecting and at ways to help your tulips to look good and stay strong. Over to you, Tom.
Why did people spend so much money on these tulips? Well, it seems to be attributed to a type which emerged, we know with hindsight, because of a virus which got into the works, and it produced tulip petals with different shaped streaks on them, and it added a third colour to the option for the whole of the flower. And people took to these like ducks to water. They loved it. You had to have one of these so-called bizarres, type of tulip, and money was just thrown at them because of the coloration and the images on the petals. So attractive. I was trying to think of a modern day equivalent, and the only one I can come up with is the snowdrop. It's nowhere near the same money has been spent on this, and it will not lead to people's financial ruin. But people look at snowdrops, galanthophiles especially, and they see the lovely white flowers, and there's generally a green or a gold or a yellowish streak or a spot on those white petals. And it's these that people go for. get on the hands and knees and look through them, get a hand lens to see what the colour's like, and if it's slightly different, just a small marking on a petal, that snowdrop bulb, single bulb, can cost a small fortune. Most snowdrops, you can buy them in the green when they've just finished flowering, a bunch of snowdrops for a perfectly reasonable amount of money. But those with special markings on the petals go for a fortune. The memory serves me correctly, there's one called Golden Fleece, which has golden splashes on its white petals. It's the most expensive, up to date. There's an annual bidding on eBay in the spring of the year, and it went for £1,390 for a single bulb. That's not the price of a house today, and it's not going to break the bank necessarily. It's someone's pursuit, their pleasure, so fine. But that's the type of thing that happened in a mega scale way back with the this tulipmania in the Dutch state way back in the 17th century. Tulips have a little bit of a reputation for not lasting long in the soil. I have tulips I planted well over a decade ago, maybe 2 decades. I planted them deeply, and of course they survive. They come up every single year. But sometimes they do deteriorate or vanish from view when they're planted. So one of the things is plant them deeply. Another thing is don't plant them in waterlogged soil. They'll just rot in waterlogged soil, nor do they like acidic soil. So it's useful if you're leaving them in the ground, as many people do today, to give a dressing of limestone dressing every year. Years ago, when I was a young gardener, we used to use tulips in spring bedding. They're still used in spring bedding. For example, we put them into a forget-me-not on the surface of the soil, and the tulips would be beneath. Myosotis forget-me-not with flower blue, and the yellow tulip come up between. Another favourite spring bedding scheme was polyanthus, mixed colours on the surface, and red or different coloured tulips coming up through and rising above them and flowering. Every year, when they'd finished flowering, before we put the spring bedding out in early June, we lift the tulip bulbs, store them, keep them in cold store until the autumn, and plant them again. They lasted year on year then. Now, people leave them in the soil, but they haven't got a good reputation for lasting in that soil. There are so many to choose from. There are about 15 different divisions or groups, and number 1 to 11 basically are botanical type, and that's where most of the tulips we see in the garden come from. Others, 12 to 15, the species type. And if you're going to plant any in containers, go for the dwarf Kaufmanniana or Greigii type. That's Kaufmanniana or Greigii type. Other than that, get some catalogues ordered. They're free. If you offer a postage stamp, post self-addressed envelope, get online, get on the phone, get your catalogues together, sort your bulbs out, order well in advance before autumn.
This is the Nature Garden Podcast with Carl Steinson, Tom Pattinson, Tom Cadwallender and Steve Lowe.
With its skinny malinky lang legs and its love of the river and ponds and the seaside, it's a bird that resonates with me, the heron. Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology has been delving into the data of field surveys and the ways in which the colonial grey heron has moved with the times.
The UK has a kind of a fantastic reputation for collecting bird information, data, if you like, on populations, behaviour and distribution and that sort of thing. And we're really very good, and it's volunteer field workers and professional, but mainly volunteer field workers who go out annually collecting information about birds. And it's that information that's really provided us, the government, conservation organisations, with the wherewithal, the knowledge to be able to kind of conserve some bird species and inform conservation. Sometimes, obviously, it's just too late, but otherwise, we can actually do something about it. But it's interesting, actually, that we do go out and collect information. And long runs of data are really very important. The more data we have, the better it is. And I'm just reminded of the grey heron, or the heronry census, and that's run by the British Trust for Ornithology. And that's been running since 1933. In fact, it's the longest running bird survey in the world, actually. And again, it's data is largely collected by field workers, volunteer field workers, and the data is analysed by professional scientists within the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology. So it's the longer runs you have, the more kind of robust that data is, and you can iron out sort of annual kind of fluctuations or sort of local fluctuations. The longer the trends, we can actually produce bird trends, which are great. And I'm just thinking about the data that we've produced from the grey heron, and you think the population is quite stable. But if you kind of looked at the information straight after really quite a hard winter, say the 1948, 1963, 64, the early 1980s, you'd think the population would fall off a cliff. But actually what happens is the population recovers, and relatively quickly. And we know that on a range of species as well. We know small bird populations, they get hammered. The resident ones get hammered by bad winters. But we know within 2 or 3 years that the population has recovered. Similarly with birds of prey or owls. I know barn owls are kind of really hit hard by bad winters because they're non-migratory and they are resident species, can't hunt, so big numbers decline. But within half a dozen years, the population is back up to where it should be. But it's interesting, this information has been collected by volunteer field workers, and we know, and this is how it works. It's great. But let's get back to the kind of the grey heron. I've been involved with grey herons for a long time, actually. And I remember back in the days when I was sort of really quite intensively studying the species. The kind of, in Northumberland, it's quite an interesting species because herons generally nest as colonial nesters, and they will nest in heronries. And these can be very, very traditional, particularly in the southern part of the country, where they can be used over tens of decades, and the data goes back a long way in the record. And sometimes the heronries can be kind of 30, 40, 50 nests big, and these are huge platforms. Don't forget, huge platforms these birds will nest on. But in Northumberland, we're countering that, because the heronries are generally quite small, 3-4 pairs maximum, and they're in conifer plantations. And it's quite bizarre, actually. Even, shelter belts will be in there. And I remember, as I say, back in the day when I was kind of studying them quite intensively, I would go and climb these conifers, and you would kind of, the nests would be right at the top of these trees, which is amazing when you think of a heron, which is quite a long-legged, ungainly bird. I'm sure you'll remember what a heron looks like. If you're anywhere near water, you'll be familiar with grey herons, and they kind of stand on quite long legs. They're quite big birds, long, deep wings, and they've got a floppy wing beats. But they'll stand there and they'll eat almost anything, really will. But these birds are quite ungainly. You think, how on earth do they build these huge nests on top of these conifers? And they do. It's incredible. But yeah, climbing these conifers to try and get their young to put rings on their legs. It's incredible. You kind of just, you're climbing up maybe 20, 30 feet, and you're just leaning out to get round the nest platform, and then you're greeted by this pterodactyl, this prehistoric sort of chick sitting on there, and there can be 3 or 4 chicks up on the nest platform. Oh, and it's an incredible sort of sight. And they've got dagger-like bills, and they're just waiting to stick you in the forehead. Fortunately, I wear specs, so I have got some protection from my eyes. But we'll lower them down the trees, and colleagues or I would ring the young, and it's quite a regular thing for their previous meal to be puked out over your legs, and this half-digested eel or fish or frog or whatever is kind of just spread out on top of your legs. But these rigging studies have been really quite useful because they've enabled us to have some understanding of the longevity of the birds. There's a high mortality in their first winter. As you would expect, these birds are really predatory species, so they'll eat almost anything, but they've got to learn how to do it. And they soon as after they're kind of fledged, they will be seen standing around in fields just not sure what to do, but their parents are trying to guide them into understanding how they feed. And if they don't grasp it sort of early on, they could perish during the winter. And there's quite a high mortality in the first winter. But actually, if they can get the fishing or the feeding sort of sorted, they'll get a good life. They can breed, or they can live up till about 25 years old, which is quite phenomenal, really. And they'll breed after 2 to 3 years. So yeah, they're really quite good. But in Northumberland, they're in these shelter belts, and they're only small plantations, and it's quite interesting that way. And we've been trying to get a handle on really how the population is working in Northumberland, but it's very difficult because they're in these plantations, and these plantations are readily felled, so there's no real longevity to kind of any of these heronries. But it's fascinating actually to go in there. And if you go in early in the season, you kind of and you're looking to sort of trying to find the nest, and you'll find these pale blue eggshells at the bottom of the trees, and you're quite successful. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear the bills clacking of the young ones. And as these young ones get older, the bill clacking gets slightly deeper and deeper as the season progresses. And at the end of the summer, we're likely to see these big, gangly things, not really sure what's going on in their lives, standing out into pools. But they're fantastic. I love grey herons. They're just sort of they have something about them. So next time you're out and about and you see a grey heron, just think of this great life cycle it has, and all of the information that we have on the grey heron, and all of the data and the trends and so forth, and just be mindful that these are just wonderful species. Great stuff.
And so, here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
And so the jobs for the week. The newspapers have been telling us this week things we already knew. It's been the driest April on record, and longest period of frost for many a long year in April. I've lost count of the nights we've had frost. I've been covering items over in the unheated greenhouse, the sweet corn runner beans, which are growing on in pots. To get them out soon, I'll have to, but I've protected them and they're still going okay. So I'm through that bit. It's the lack of water that's been a problem outdoors. I've been taking the watering can out, and you must do this if you see any plants collapsing. The polyanthus I have, and primulas as well. I've got a lovely primula, Garriard Guinevere, which is purple flowers with a yellow centre, and the whole plants, about 24 plants, they've been drooping each day. So I've not to frost with the drought, and I've had because they're tough, I've had the watering can over them, and they've stood again. So they keep on going. So keep watering, for goodness sake. This is so important with the fruit trees outside. Again, the newspaper this week have been saying, farmers in the south of England saying it's going to affect the apple harvest and other top fruit or tree fruit harvests, the fact that there's been frost and there's drought about. I've seen the pollinating insects, bees galore, on my conference pear, which is in full bloom as I speak, and it's okay. It's through the frost, but I'm worried about the watering bits, so I'm watering those as well with the hose this time. So the Victoria plum, which is in full bloom, watering that with the hose as well. And the apples have just started. Discovery, the first apple to open its flower buds, they're flowering now as well. So we need keep watering to keep those things going. Out on the vegetable patch, I'm feeding. I've fed the different veggies. I put them in and forked it in. I'm using fish, blood and bone, full of NPK, the three main ingredients, balanced diet for the plants once they get themselves moving. They were in pots, the broad beans and the peas, planted them out some time ago. They're really tough. I'm putting this coming week, I'm going to also plant out my onions, which were grown from seed, been growing on in pots, and they're cool temperate plants. They're fairly tough, so they'll take it. They're planted out as well. Going to a general feed isn't a bad thing. If you've got a tub of blood, fish and bone, any general fertiliser, whether it's for fruit trees, fruit bushes, or vegetables, if you're going to plant some vegetables, put a handful around, say a handful to the square metre, sprinkle it round and fork it in, and it will do the rest. Keep them happy until they get underway, get started. I've been looking around the spring shrubs, and the forsythia has just finished flowering, so now I have to prune it. The stems that have had flowers on, spent stems, I'll follow them down as far as they go, and they'll come out. And where there's a junction with a young stem coming up, a pale green stem coming up, I'll cut that far down and leave it to grow on this year. It will ripen along with others of that ilk in the summer, and it will produce the flowers next year. The heathers, I'm just going over the winter heathers, so-called, the ericacarnias. They're finished flowering now. All I do is remove the dead flower heads. That's all it needs. Don't cut deeply into the old wood, just the dead flower heads, and they'll spring on from that. And by the middle of July, there'll be young shoots there. You can take stem cuttings. That's the main way in which heathers are raised, propagated. I'm sowing seeds out there, hardy annuals. It costs about £3 for a packet of hardy annuals. They'll cover a square metre or a metre of space in the garden. And it's worth it because the hardy annual of your choice can spring up and fill that with a patch of colour which will last for most of the summer. That's a simple thing to do. Make some drills, sow them in the drills, and when the seeds germinate, you can tell the difference between the weeds and the plants themselves. So you just hoe in between the drills. Apart from that, in the greenhouse, the grapes are just flowering. After 6 leaves along the side shoots, they're just flowering, so I go 1 leaf joint beyond the bunch of flowers or embryo bunch of grapes, and I pinch it out, and that lets all of the goodness go into developing flowers and then the bunches of grapes afterwards. There's some lovely spring displays out there flowering. Get yourself out and enjoy them. Spend time on that, and whatever you're doing this week, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust. I'm Carl Steinson, and do check out our Twitter and Facebook page, The Nature Garden, and we'll be back soon. And in the meantime, enjoy your gardening and your time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.